Yeah.
You know, it's funny, when you think about it, like back in 2014, with things in Ukraine kind of heating up, only like 1 in 6 Americans could actually find it on a map. Like
Wow.
1 in 6. You'd think with this, possible global conflict right there, brewing basic geography wouldn't be such a mystery.
Yeah. That's pretty wild when you consider like how quickly we developed COVID-19 vaccines or all the intricate diplomacy going on with the whole war in Europe, like the preface of this new edition was talking about.
Exactly. We can do some pretty amazing stuff with knowledge and all, but
Mm,
then you see a statistic like that from 2014, and it's like, whoa, hold on a sec.
makes you wonder about the gaps, right?
Big time.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads us to today's deep dive because you suggested Tom Nichols' book, The Death of Expertise, and it just felt so relevant to what we're all about here, like helping our listeners really grasp these complicated issues without getting totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, no, I think it's a perfect fit for what we do.
Right. So Nichols really dives into this whole idea of how public trust in experts has just eroded, and everyone thinks their opinion is as good as anyone else's.
And it's not like this is something new either. Nichols quotes Isaac Asimov right at the start, and Asimov really nailed it years ago. This whole strain of anti-intellectualism in American culture, he called it a cult of ignorance.
Oh yeah, that quote about my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge.
Exactly, that's the one.
Powerful stuff. So today we're going to break down Nichols's arguments for everyone, see what he's saying, share some interesting bits and pieces, and hopefully keep things clear and engaging.
Yeah, we want to get to the core of what's going on, how it shows up in different ways and why it really matters.
Okay, so Nichols starts off by saying how this distrust of experts, this whole thing, isn't something that just popped up with Twitter and Facebook, you know?
Right, it's got deeper roots. He even tells the story about when he was a young professor visiting his brother at his bar. And this guy at the bar finds out what Nichols does for a living and says something like, "Oh, he's a professor, huh? Well, he seems like a good guy anyway." You know, classic kind of American skepticism towards intellectuals.
Like they're all stuck up in their ivory tower.
Exactly. And Nichols talks about his own experience working in policy even before the internet was a thing. He'd run into people with these very strong but completely uninformed opinions telling him how to fix, complex global issues.
Like armchair experts.
Oh, yeah, big time. And it wasn't just him, right? Specialists in all sorts of fields, economics, environment, you name it, they were dealing with the same thing.
Everyone's got a solution.
Everyone knows better.
Right, but Nichols argues that something's changed recently.
Yeah.
It's not just that people have opinions, which the internet has definitely amplified. Like,
Right.
he says, imagine the 1920s if every crank had their own radio station.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It's gone beyond that now, hasn't it?
It has. It's not just skepticism now. It's like outright hostility towards experts and institutions. It's not just disagreement. It's this deep distrust that sends people down these crazy conspiracy rabbit holes.
They reject anything that challenges their worldview.
Exactly. And the thing is, it's not about lack of access to information anymore. We're swimming in it.
Right, so what's the deal then?
Well, Nichols says it's the sheer volume and nature of information in the digital age that's making things worse. It's like all this information is actually feeding the distrust. It's kind of a paradox.
And get this, one of the more surprising arguments Nichols makes is about higher education. You'd think more people going to college would mean a more informed public right.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
But he says it might actually be part of the problem.
It's really interesting. He talks about how going to college has become so widespread that being a college graduate doesn't mean the same thing it used to. It doesn't guarantee a certain level of achievement or knowledge anymore.
So it's not about getting a college education. It's about the experience of going to college.
Right. It's become much more consumer-driven. Like you said, the customer is always right, even in academia.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, he uses examples like Campus Nudity Week at Brown to show how universities are focusing on these non-academic things. It raises questions about what these institutions are really for now.
And then there's the whole diploma mill thing. The
Yeah.
line between actual education and just training is getting blurry.
Yeah, some degrees are more about showing up and paying tuition than actual learning. He even tells a story about grad students expecting an A just because they thought the teaching was good, regardless of whether they actually learned anything.
Wow.
Talk about entitlement, right?
Big time.
Yeah.
And he also talks about how students have more power now when it comes to tuition. And there's this big focus on keeping students comfortable and happy, even if it means lowering academic standards.
It's a tricky balance.
For sure.
Yeah.
And to really illustrate this, he talks about that incident at Yale where students wanted to get rid of the major English poets course because it's focused on white male authors.
Oh, yeah, and that professor at Hamline who got fired for showing a painting of the Prophet Muhammad after a student complained.
It's like students are dictating what they should be learning.
Right. It goes against this whole idea of academic freedom. And Nichols contrasts this with that astrophysicist who said, "My guesses are much, much better than yours."
I remember that line.
It's like people are resisting the idea that experts actually know more than them.
And then there's online learning during the pandemic that seemed to make things worse.
Yeah, it eroded decorum and focus even more. It's like,
I
what
know.
even is a serious learning environment anymore?
It all gets blurred. And what about this trend of smaller colleges calling themselves universities and creating all these niche graduate programs?
It seems like a way to attract funding, but it also makes you wonder if it's devaluing degrees in general.
Right. If everyone has a university degree, does it even mean anything? And then there's student evaluations, which can encourage professors to be more entertaining than challenging.
Yeah, got to keep those customers happy.
It's crazy. And finally, Nichols talks about how anti-intellectualism has crept onto college campuses themselves with things like safe spaces and speech codes.
It's like we're going backwards, becoming less tolerant. He tells the story about a student at Yale who got mad at a professor for not making the classroom feel like a home instead of an intellectual space.
Unbelievable.
Right. And then there were those protests at the University of Missouri after a pretty minor incident that led to people resigning.
Yeah, it shows how fragile these institutions can be.
It's pretty worrying when you think about it. Okay, so let's talk about the internet now. Nichols calls it a double-edged sword.
Makes sense. It's this amazing source of information, but it's also fueling this whole problem we're talking about.
Exactly. He says it's like artillery support for the attack on knowledge, just bombarding everyone with information.
All those internet laws,
Yeah.
like Godwin's law and Skid's law.
Yeah, they're funny, but they also show how online discussions can go off the rails so easily.
It's hard to stay focused on facts. And what about fact-checking?
He talks about how fact-checking efforts haven't been that successful. Mentions Brooke Binkowski and how Dewey had to stop writing his "What was fake" on the internet column because there was just too much to keep up with.
Plus, people tend to believe what they already believe anyway.
Confirmation bias.
Exactly. So they just ignore the facts that don't fit their worldview. And then there's counter-knowledge.
Yeah, basically fake knowledge that looks real but is designed to contradict actual facts. The internet lets people with these fringe ideas connect and reinforce each other.
It creates these echo chambers.
Exactly. And once that bad information is out there, it's almost impossible to get rid of. It's like a cockroach. You can't kill it.
It just keeps coming back.
Yeah.
And Nichols brings up Gwyneth Paltrow and GOOP.
Oh, yeah. Perfect example of how celebrities can influence what people believe about health, even if it goes against what actual doctors say.
It's scary how much power they have. And he tells that sad story about the British teenager whose doctors didn't take her seriously because they thought she was just Googling her symptoms.
But he also points out that you rarely hear about cases where people are misdiagnosed because of the internet. It feeds into that confirmation bias again.
Right, because those cases don't make headlines. And there's that study from UCL that found that people mostly power browse online instead of actually reading deeply.
They're not looking for understanding. They just want to win arguments or confirm what they already believe.
It's like they're skimming the surface.
Exactly. And then there's Wikipedia, which a lot of people see as this democratic source of knowledge.
The ultimate encyclopedia.
Right. But Nichols points out that it has limitations like keeping things accurate and neutral. He even mentions that most of the editors are male, and there have been cases of politically motivated editing.
So it's not perfect.
Not at all. And Nichols says true knowledge is about more than just facts. You need context, nuance, critical thinking. He uses John Oliver's bit about polling people on whether owls exist to make this point.
Not everything can be decided by popular vote.
Right. And then he talks about Elon Musk buying Twitter as this perfect example of how social media, the Dunning-Kruger effect, and this whole death of expertise thing all come together.
Someone with a lot of money and confidence, but not necessarily expertise, thinking they know best.
Yeah, and that story about the journalist who faked a study about chocolate and weight loss shows how easy it is to create these fads and spread misinformation online.
It's kind of scary how quickly things can go viral. And even places like Vox can get things wrong, like that mistake about the Gaza West Bank bridge.
Nobody's immune to making mistakes.
And more news sources don't necessarily mean better quality.
He mentions Sturgeon's law, right? 90% of everything is crud.
Exactly. And all this competition in the media can lead to prioritizing entertainment over actual in-depth reporting.
It's all about getting clicks and views.
Okay, so it's important to note that Nichols doesn't think experts are always right. He acknowledges that they can make mistakes.
Oh, for sure. He talks about things like thalidomide, the Vietnam War, the Challenger disaster.
Huge mistakes with terrible consequences.
Right. Exactly. But he says there's a difference between honest mistakes, well-intentioned overconfidence, and actual fraud.
It's not all the same.
Right. And he says it's important for people to understand how and why experts can be wrong and how they're supposed to correct themselves.
It's about transparency and accountability.
Exactly. So what does Nichols say makes a real expert?
He says it's a combo of education, talent, experience, and peer affirmation.
It's not just about having a degree.
Right.
Yeah.
You need that natural ability, the drive to keep learning, and the respect of others in your field. He talks about Marshall Schulman, who spent years reading Soviet periodicals.
And it gave him this intuitive understanding that went beyond just facts and figures.
It's that deep immersion that makes a difference.
Yeah.
But he also says that just doing the same thing over and over doesn't necessarily make you an expert.
He calls it the one-year experience 20 times phenomenon.
Right. But even experts who aren't the absolute best still know more than the average person.
That's important to remember. And he talks about that goodwill hunting idea, that just reading a lot can make you as knowledgeable as someone with formal education.
Like Matt Damon's character in the movie.
Right. He says that's just not true.
Reading is great, but it's not a substitute for actual training and experience.
Exactly. And then there's the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Where the least competent people are the most confident.
Because they don't even realize how much they don't know.
It's a recipe for disaster. And, of course, we can't forget about confirmation bias.
Always looking for information that confirms what we already believe.
Nichols even uses his own fear of flying as an example, even though he knows statistically it's safe.
We all have our biases. And then there's Occam's razor.
The simplest explanation is usually the best one.
Right. But conspiracy theories often go in the opposite direction.
They love complexity and hidden connections.
Nichols says it's a way for people to feel like they have special knowledge and to make sense of a world that feels chaotic.
It gives them a sense of control.
Exactly. And his advice on arguing with conspiracy theorists, don't bother.
It's like talking to a brick wall.
They'll just twist everything to fit their narrative. Okay, let's talk about COVID-19. Now, Nichols uses it as a case study for this whole death of expertise thing.
It definitely brought all these issues to the forefront.
Yeah, you had distrust of science and experts, political polarization, and experts themselves making mistakes.
It was a perfect storm.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning, everyone was scared and relying on the media and government for guidance.
And then came all the lockdowns and restrictions.
Which a lot of people didn't like.
And then Trump started politicizing the whole thing.
Remember when he suggested injecting bleach?
Oh, yeah, and then he stopped those informative briefings.
It created so much confusion and distrust.
And then there was Cuomo, who was initially praised for his handling of the pandemic, but then came the scandal with the nursing home deaths.
It was like no one could be trusted.
And then the whole debate about school closures got so heated.
Emily Oster became a target for just presenting.
And the teachers' unions had a lot of influence on Biden's policies.
It was also politically charged. And then there was the contrast between Fauci's cautious approach to the George Floyd protests and that open letter from doctors supporting the protests.
It showed how public health recommendations could be influenced by political and social factors.
And the differences in vaccination rates and death rates across states were striking.
It correlated strongly with political affiliation.
It's like people were choosing their reality based on their politics.
And then you had DeSantis, who initially supported vaccination, but then changed his tune.
And appointed that vaccine skeptic as Surgeon General.
It shows how powerful political messaging can be.
So basically, COVID became a weapon in the partisan wars.
And it just eroded trust even further.
Whether experts were right or wrong.
It was a lose-lose situation. Okay, so what about the political consequences of all this?
Well, Nichols points to Brexit as a prime example of what can happen when you ignore expert warnings.
All those economists and other experts were saying it would be a bad idea.
But people voted for it anyway.
And the UK has faced a lot of economic challenges since then.
And Michael Gove's comment about people having had enough of experts really sums up the mood at the time.
It's like expertise itself became a bad word.
And Nichols says Trump tapped into that same sentiment in the U.S.
Yeah, and his administration often disregarded expert advice, which led to some negative outcomes.
He mentions figures like Jim Jordan, who also pushed this anti-expert rhetoric.
But Nichols also suggests that Trump's support might have been more than just political agreement. It might have been something closer to a cult following.
That's an interesting idea.
He talks about parasocial relationships, where people feel a personal connection to a public figure, even though that figure doesn't know them.
Like they're friends even though they've never met.
Exactly. And figures like Trump, Musk, Kennedy Jr., They cultivate these relationships,
They present themselves as relatable and authentic.
which contrasts with the often more distant image of
It's
experts.
like they're saying, I'm just like you.
And the scary thing is, it's not just anti-rationalism anymore. It's a rejection of established knowledge in favor of folk wisdom, amplified by the internet.
Like people would rather trust their Uncle Joe's Facebook posts than a scientist with years of experience.
Exactly. And it creates this vicious cycle where lack of knowledge leads to disengagement from civic life, which leads to even less knowledge.
It's a downward spiral.
And Nichols says we can't just ignore expert advice anymore. Our society is too complex.
We need people who actually know what they're doing.
But he also warns against the politicization of expertise, where leaders only listen to experts who agree with them.
It's like cherry-picking evidence to support your pre-existing beliefs,
Exactly. And Nichols reminds us that the U.S. is a republic, not a direct democracy.
which a lot of people seem to forget.
The Founding Fathers didn't want every decision to be made by popular vote.
They wanted informed deliberation and representation.
And Nichols brings up that Jimmy Kimmel segment and that polling data that shows how voters often focus on personality over policy.
Like that thing about bombing Agrabah.
Yeah, it shows how uninformed some voters can be.
And the media's obsession with balance can actually be misleading.
Especially when there's a clear consensus among experts on one side of an issue.
It creates this false equivalence that just confuses people.
And Nichols ends with this really disturbing observation about how people in Western democracies, especially in the U.S., are misunderstanding democracy itself.
They're demanding equality in a way that actually undermines expertise.
He mentions Ortega y Gasset's Revolt of the Masses and Screwtape's line about "I'm as good as you."
It's this resentment of any kind of intellectual authority.
And Nichols warns that no democracy can function if we reject expert advice and informed deliberation as a matter of principle.
It's a chilling thought.
It is. It's like we're cutting off our nose to spite our face.
So there you have it, folks. Tom Nichols is The Death of Expertise. It's a dense book, but it's packed with insights into this really crucial issue we're facing.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground today. The changing landscape of higher education, the role of the internet, the nature of expertise itself, and the political forces that are shaping all of this.
It's complex stuff, but hopefully we've shed some light on it for you.
And by understanding these dynamics, you're better equipped to navigate this crazy information world we live in.
Make informed decisions, be a critical thinker. That's what it's all about. And it leaves us with this final question to ponder: what's our individual responsibility in all of this?
How do we find reliable knowledge in a world full of noise and misinformation?
What happens to a republic when expertise is constantly devalued?
And how can we bridge the gap between experts and the public?
These are big questions, folks, but they're worth thinking about.
And as Nichols says, it's crucial to be mindful of our own information habits and to seek out a variety of reliable sources.
Even those that challenge our beliefs.
Exactly. It's like having a balanced diet for your mind.
That's a great way to put it. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and keep those brains engaged.
Absolutely. Stay curious, stay informed, and keep learning.